Welcome to TRIRIGA 101. In this presentation, we'll have an overview of the TRIRIGA product, but mostly focus on basic terminology and concepts. This is geared toward people who are either brand new users or potential users. TRIRIGA is an integrated workplace management system, or IWMS. The 6 pillars of TRIRIGA, real estate management, project management, space and facilities management, workplace resources, operations and service, and environmental and energy management, cover the full life cycle of real estate. The first pillar of TRIRIGA is real estate management. This module has functionality from the very earliest stages of portfolio planning, when you're doing market analysis, looking at potential sites, executing projects to compare different options, and finally deciding which option and performing transaction management. If a lease is involved, TRIRIGA has lease administration abilities that have critical dates, clauses, options, payment schedules, FASB compliance, and other accounting and financial reporting. If it's an accounts receivable lease, we have the ability to bill services and for the terms of that lease and manage the payments received. We also have accounts payable payment processing, and typically this involves an integration to an ERP or something. The second pillar of TRIRIGA is project management. The project management module covers program management, managing funding, managing the scope, cost, schedule of a project, managing those resources, whether internal or external, the permitting processes, and vendor engagement, including building bid sheets that are sent to invited service providers in an Excel format, processing and doing side-by-side comparison of those bid responses, and allowing you to award a bid in the system that creates a contract commitment. We then can process invoices from our service providers against those committed contracts. It's a very robust budget management system as well, with hierarchical cost code structures that can be drilled down into to see the lowest level and then roll back up to the highest level. The third TRIRIGA pillar is facilities and space management. This functionality allows you to manage spaces down to the building floor individual space level, using BOMA and IFMA classifications for space, doing chargeback scenarios. It allows you to request maybe new space or to dispose of space. It provides move management for individual or group moves. There is a strategic planning component to look more at the higher level of entire buildings and facilities and how those are being utilized, creating scenarios and determining the best plan forward over a long period of time. We have provisioning requests that can be processed, and there is an integration to CAD so that you are able to have graphical views inside TRIRIGA, and if CAD drawings are changed, such as a wall moved in a space, it's reflected in TRIRIGA. The Workplace Resources module allows you to manage conference rooms, perhaps entire conference centers, and other reservable assets, such as vehicles. Through this system, you're able to determine and request what kind of layouts you might want for a room. Do you need other services? Do you require catering? It allows you to manage hoteling space and do visitor management as well. There's a plugin available to Microsoft Exchange and Outlook so that you have the ability to directly see and book available rooms through Outlook. The Operations and Service module has functionality to manage corrective, planned, and preventive maintenance. It has a contact center component that can be used by a help desk. It has service management to determine the appropriate service provider, manage the contracts, SLAs, and do KPIs. It takes into account warranties. It has security and key management. It also has a facility condition assessment component. And then based on the data that is available from everything, you can have capital planning as well. The environmental and energy management component, also known as TRIS for TRIRIGA Real Estate Environmental Sustainability, has full functionality required to do CO2 calculations. It tracks utilities such as your energy, carbon credits, utilities, waste, and water. It also allows you to identify and track green opportunities and then do comparisons and present those back to modules such as capital projects for funding. It tracks environmental certifications such as LEED or BREEAM, or it could be an internal certification because you're allowed to build your own checklist. And it has a component to integrate to Energy Star. All these different modules are tied together through Request Central and via Business Analytics, so you can look at the big picture of your real estate portfolio. The system has a common workplace platform, a library for document management, and the base portfolio of people, places, things, organizations that are shared across all modules. It's highly integratable and has an integration platform that typically is tied to an ERP system such as SAP, Oracle, PeopleSoft, building management systems, Maximo, energy management systems, and other types of integrations that are needed. At the end of the day, the strength of the product is that it has shared and common data and processes. What you do when you're identifying property goes through the complete real estate cycle and to the point that you actually have disposition of property. Let's cover some basic terminology around the system. You have a login screen that can be adapted with logos from your company, or if you're using single sign-on, you can pass information from something like Active Directory to it. TRIRIGA has a variety of portals that are already set up for roles that can be adapted to your particular firm's needs. For instance, if we go in as a program manager, you'll see the default portal. Now, TRIRIGA portals are broken into what are called landing pages. So each of these menu items, and these menus are configurable, again, based on your licenses and your individual user requirements, typically by role. And when I click on one of those, I get a landing page for projects. Or if I click on funding request, then I get a landing page around funding request. And again, these are all configurable. You also have the ability to allow users to personalize the portal. Each of these landing pages has content that is established by the system administrator. You can, as a system administrator, make additional functionality available so that it can be added. I can, as a user, remove content. I can add it back in. I can rearrange it so that I can change my own user experience to suit me. Now, this is a security setting, whether we allow individual groups of users to do this or not. For users who have access to capital projects, you'll also notice in the upper right-hand corner here that we have something called company and project. Company data means we're looking at the whole portfolio of projects, but I can individually change to see only, in this case, the last project I was in. You'll see the project data now comes up. I can also use my locator, and this magnifying glass is called a locator, and this will allow me to select a different project. Portals are made up of sections. Each of these are a section. Performance metrics is a section. Reminders is a section. I can expand that section. I can collapse it. And the same goes for my reports. I can expand it, or I can collapse it. The reminder section is very important because it contains action items and different types of notifications. So for instance, if I select this, I will see that I currently have no action items, but I have one notification. An action item is something I need to do. I may need to review something. A notification is for information. If I open a notification, I have some information, but then I can also go back and see the referenced record, which is where the request or the forward notification came from. We're going to change now to a different user so you can see how the portal adapts. I'm going to go in as a system administrator. And now you'll see my menus all changed because I'm in as an administrator. I have access to everything in the system. And you can see a functionality around application building and around administration, utilities, licensing, security, and other functionality. One of the fundamental tenets of TRIRIGA is around portfolio: people, places, things, and organizations. Geography: what the world looks like. I have world regions. World regions are broken down into countries. Countries can be broken down into states and provinces, which can be broken down into cities, counties, and MSAs. Locations: places. Places may be retail locations, offices, centers, airports, different types of spaces. So if I look at retail, I can have shopping centers. Within shopping centers, I have individual locations. If we look at offices, typically we might have property. We may have buildings. So here's our headquarters campus. This is a property. A property has buildings. Buildings have floors. Floors have spaces. If we look at the Charlotte Watson Center, and one thing that's not noticed here, but you can do, is spaces can have spaces down to 4 levels by default out of the box. So you can subdivide over and over. You also have something called space groups. This is used around concepts like neighborhoods. We also have organizations. Organizations can be internal, how your particular company is set up. Companies have divisions. Divisions have departments. Departments can have other departments. You also have something called external organizations, such as vendors. We can have tenants, landlords, work groups. We have people. People are classified typically as employees, consultants, or external contacts. So an employee normally is an internal person. Consultants are often people who actually work maybe at an office, but they're actually externally attached. And then you have external contacts. Now, external contacts are attached to external companies like our service providers. So this is someone who maybe receives a notification or needs to be included as a team member. And sometimes you can see that they may be active users. And then finally we have things. Things are specifications and assets. So for instance, these are individual assets. In my system, there are 157 building equipment assets. I can open an individual record, and I have lots of information about individual assets, its status, a picture, any kind of assessments that have been done, anything around environmental, our operating schedule, complete maintenance history. The specifications are very similar to assets in nature, except a specification is what it says. It's not a physical thing. It's not something you can touch. A Dell laptop or a Dell Latitude E7440 is a specification. An individual Latitude E7440 is an asset. Now in TRIRIGA, we talk about things such as forms. This is a form. Building equipment is a form. Forms have tabs, each of these individual tabs. Now it's good to know about these terms because in the case of like tabs, we can use security to turn tabs off to make them invisible to certain users. We can restrict them to be read-only. And the same even for forms. Some cases we may let them see all of the tabs on a form, but maybe it's in a read-only state. Certain tabs are rarely seen by anyone but system administrators. Notifications is an example. The notifications tab is what your approval chain. You can have notes and documents attached to almost any record in TRIRIGA. Typically, the system tab is going to be turned off. The system tab contains some information in the background that lets us restrict in security who can see things. For instance, I could have this system geography tab if it were populated, say, with Rhode Island, and someone was set to see only information in Texas, they wouldn't even know this record existed. It's more of an internal thing that administrators see. You have calendars, workflow instances. This is in another internal tab showing how things were processed against this data. Are there reports attached? Something in TRIRIGA called associations. And associations are very critical. It's relationships. It's how things are associated to each other in the system. This is a word you will hear a lot and probably start using more as you use TRIRIGA. And we'll go more into modules and business objects and explain that functionality. But what this is telling us is this building equipment record for this individual asset is tied to a classification in the system. It's tied to location, an actual individual space where it exists. It is tied to an organizational record, etc. Other terms besides tabs. Within tabs, we have sections. So general is a section. And you notice I can expand and collapse it. And TRIRIGA will remember how I did this for me as a user, so that next time I come in, I don't have to do it again. Another important fact about sections is through security, again, we have the option to hide, make invisible, make read-only individual sections on a tab. You'll notice certain icons. For instance, here's our record locator again to look something up. X clears the value. You can see there's different locators. This allows us to upload an image. You'll also notice buttons in the upper right-hand corners. These are actions. These are things you are allowed to do based on your security role. In security, we can turn on and off actions that are available to a user. So a user can have access to a form. Inside that form, they have access to different tabs. Within a tab, they have access to different sections. And then they have these are form actions. And down here, you'll notice there are a couple of section actions. So in asset status, I can determine who is allowed to assign an asset or maybe show that asset as being lost. You'll see here there's another find to look up building systems. So I can turn these actions on and off either at the section level or all the way up at the form level. The concept to become familiar with is that TRIRIGA is organized into modules. Now you don't necessarily need to know all these modules unless you plan on doing reporting, and it's very helpful. For instance, we were just looking at assets, so I'm going to go to the asset module, and we were looking at building equipment. And if you remember the form, the building equipment form had different tabs that had general, etc. And if I click on that tab, then I can see the sections and all the different fields that are in a section. This is what it looks like to a developer. Another concept are state transitions. And this is important to us because state transitions are the life cycle of a record of information in TRIRIGA. So for instance, this particular thing called an asset has null, which means we haven't actually created the record. It has a draft state. It can become an active record in the system. We can retire it. We can send it for approval. We can revise it. And these are actions against it. So from a null state, I have something called create draft that creates a draft. When it's in create draft, I have an option to delete it, which takes it back to null. I can take an active record and revise it. I can copy it. I can retire it. So you'll start seeing that these tie back to the forms. And one of the important things about understanding state transitions is that this is where we tend to launch approval processes and notifications. So if I am in a draft state and I want to activate a record, and when I select to activate a record, I may launch an approval that says someone needs to review and approve this. Behind the scenes of forms and in the system are things called workflows. Sometimes this is a point of confusion because people think of workflow as the routing of review and approval for documents. TRIRIGA has that as well. This type of workflow, though, is more technical. So for instance, I have try associate. Okay. I'm going to tie an asset record to a specification. These are behind the scenes and you won't see them, but I just want you to understand what workflows are. So in this example, you see different types of commands. Now the other type of workflow would be more around approvals. We have approval requirements and templates. So an approval template this particular one is around condition assessment. We have the ability to escalate. We have a route to. So one of the things that we can do with the workflows for approvals is we can have this someone submit it. We can immediately route to their manager, and then we can have an approval rule. Here's another example. This is one for a real estate contract invoice. You can have approval rules that are sequential or parallel. In this case, I have an approver that's a person, or it could be a role. And then from that person it goes to the next person. I can have set these both to be one, and both of them would have received it at the same time. You can sequentially process, parallel, a combination of the two, and you can also do it by value. Another concept in TRIRIGA are templates. There are many different kinds of templates. For example, work task. As you can see, we have 182 work task templates. What this allows us to do is when we have a work task built, whether we're doing it manually or the system is automatically doing it, then it will apply a template, and you can have rules to automatically apply templates as well. As you can see, work task template is basically the same as a work task, but it's pre-filled with certain information, and that information is written into an actual task that's built. Another important feature of TRIRIGA is called My Reports. Now, My Reports allows me as a user, again if I'm security authorized, to create reports for myself. I can also see system reports. Now, I'm in as a system administrator, so I see the administration tab as well. So here we're seeing 113 reports of different types. I want to have an active user list. Now this is where it's good to be familiar with the concept of the modules of TRIRIGA, because you can see that in this case, in order to get an active user list, I need to know that I need to go to try people. Within try people, there's something called a profile. What columns are out there? These are friendly names on the left. On the right are the actual field names. And then you can see I have 5 different field names have been selected for my report. I can do group bys and orders. I can filter data. And I can do advanced associations. This is something that typically only a system administrator will ever do. You can also take a report and you have an ability to copy it. So what it'll do, if I take this active user report, for instance, and if I select copy, it'll make a copy in My Reports for me, and then I can change it just for my own use. Once I have a report that I like, if I think other users that are in my work group might like, I could actually copy it back as a community report and share my work with others. The last area we'll cover in our review is security. In TRIRIGA, people belong to one or more security groups. A security group tells us what organization and geography that someone is allowed to see. In this case, we're saying they're allowed to see data from all organizations, but we could restrict that down to a department level. And what geography? Are they allowed to personalize their portal? Are they allowed to use bookmarks? Who's a part of this group? What kind of access do they have? Now in TRIRIGA, access comes back to the concept of modules. So if we go down to our try asset that we were looking at earlier, in this case, this particular user has no access at all to even see the assets. But they are allowed to see building equipment, which is a type of asset. They're allowed to read, update, create, and delete. And then if you remember our discussion around state transitions, they're allowed actions. So these actions are checked. So for instance, this person can take something in a draft state, have an action called delete, and actually delete it. They can take something that's in a draft state, they can copy it to a new record, and they get a new draft record. They can take something that's in a draft state and select to activate it in the system, which sends it for approvals if there are any. The form action access is a little bit different. So there's a tab out there called building system. There's contact roles, there's documents. So in the section where they have document management, the actions to find, remove, and upload will all be visible to this user. Security is one of those areas that's very powerful in TRIRIGA. but obviously it takes a lot of systems knowledge and a lot of planning. It's also an assumption that during UAT in particular, you're probably going to find that things were overlooked in the security setup. This concludes our short overview of TRIRIGA and some of its basic concepts and terminology.